Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today. I think I already said that. And I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. And today we're going to be talking about something that I think is cool and something that I hope that you will find cool, which is cool or country of origin labeling. Now, the reason why I'm talking about all this is because let me share my screen briefly, is that in the last week or so here on The Chocolate Life, we've covered a number of announcements from the US government, from the Food and Drug Administration specifically. And we've had a number of live streams covering some of those announcements. One of those live streams was about plant-based milk alternatives. And we talked about the legislation around plant-based milk alternatives here in this episode on making an alt milk chocolate. And then we were also talking about legislation having to do with how the word healthy is going to be interpreted. And so those were announcements that came up in the last week. And one of the things that happened in the last week, actually, I think it came to my attention yesterday or the day before, was a new announcement around country of origin labeling. And so I decided, let's go create a live stream around country of origin labeling to let you know a little bit about what the new legislation is about, whether you need to worry about it or not, and how you might take the information around country of origin labeling and use it yourself, even though it may not directly apply to you. I think there are some things to think about in the research that are worthwhile paying attention to. And please, if you're watching today, whether it's whether you're participating live on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, go into the comments. Just give me a quick shout out. Let me know where you're connecting from, what part of the world you're connecting from. I'll get the shout out up on the screen. And then, of course, if you have questions about anything that I talk about during the course of the day, I will, or the course of the hour, I will get your question up on the screen and do my best to answer it. So as always, for every single one of these live streams, I put together a post on The Chocolate Life. So you are looking at the post on The Chocolate Life right now. This is live. If you went to The Chocolate Life right now and clicked on the link on the homepage, you clicked on this link here, the dog in the upper left-hand corner, you'd go to this post. And one of the reasons why I do this is I put together a bunch of resource links. So this is some of the primary, secondary, and primary research that I've done that inspired me, number one, to cover the topic, and that I've been reading and form the opinions that I have that I'm going to express over the course of the next hour. And with that, let's jump right into what it is that the announcement was. So that is that the USDA, so the United States Department of Agriculture, is proposing new requirements for what it means to put product of USA on the label of a product. So it is, that sounds like pretty obvious, I think, in many, many respects. And it may not be directly associated with country of origin labeling, which has to do with imported products. It may not seem on the surface to have anything to do with it, because country of origin labeling has to do with mostly imported products. These are in different titles of the Code of Federal Regulations. So we were talking about the Code of Federal Regulations with respect to chocolate is Title 21, 21.163. And then when we talk about the regulations around country of origin labeling, we're in Title 19, which has to do with customs and border and duties. So they're different parts of the federal code. But what's interesting about this product of USA label claim is there already exists a set of guidelines around it, right? And what we're doing is we're seeing some new requirements associated with it. And I want to do a quick shout out to Mike from Encore Coffee in Kansas City. Hey, Mike, I've got a little bit of information about the time I will be spending in Kansas City. I'll share it with you later. For people who may not know, I'm going to be going on a cross-country road trip, and I'm going to be stopping at craft chocolate makers across the country on the way from here to the Phoenix, Arizona area. And I'm going to be stopping in Cincinnati, planning to stop in Kansas City, in Denver, and a couple other places. And so I'm going to be visiting Mike at Encore Coffee when I'm in Kansas City. But in any event, right? What it, this is an issue we may not think of very, very much. But for example, if you buy a Swiss watch, a quote unquote Swiss watch, and there is on the face of the watch somewhere or on the back, it says Swiss made. What does that mean? Right? And it turns out that there's a very, very specific definition in Swiss law that says that 50% of the parts and labor that go into that watch have to be either made in Switzerland or performed in Switzerland. So, for example, I could have a $2,000 watch, but it might have a $10 Japanese quartz movement in it. So I could put that $10 quartz movement into my $10,000 watch or my $2,000 watch. And as long as all of the machining for the watch body and all of the other parts of the watch were done in Switzerland, or they could be jobbed out to different parts of the world and just assembled in Switzerland. So as long as at least 50% of the product and at least 50% of the labor was performed in Switzerland, I can call it Swiss made. And so it turns out that in this particular case, they want to update it. So what does product of USA mean, right, is the question. And in this particular case, they were only interested in beef. So the research that was done that supports all of this product of USA label claims has to do with animal products, meat specifically, right? And right now, for example, the way the product of USA labeling for meat allows is that I could import a frozen side of lamb from New Zealand, for example. And as long as it was broken down and packaged in the United States, it could be called product of USA, right? Because the process of making it ready for consumption, right, to people here in the United States was performed here in the United States. So this is, it's just an interesting idea. There are links which will give you a background to all of the thinking and the research that was being done. And what I wanted to do was go through and say, okay, so here is a document, right? And it talks about the voluntary labeling. So again, this is a voluntary thing. Country of origin labeling is no longer required. And country of origin labeling, when it comes to product of USA, is not a requirement. This is something you can voluntarily do. And what the guidelines here are saying that if you want to put product of USA anywhere in your label or use it in your marketing, here's what you need to do in order to be able to qualify, to be able to make the claims. Right? What's most interesting about all of this is this document. Sorry, I was looking through it and I'm at the bottom of the document. This document here, it's very, very long, right? So 70 pages, which is analyzing consumers' values of product of USA labeling claims. And again, this is done entirely in terms of the beef industry, right? And I encourage you to, the link for this is on The Chocolate Life. So if you go to the post for The Chocolate Life, the link to this is here, analyzing consumers' value claims. So that will get you this PDF, and you can just put it, you can read it online or you can download it locally. And what I want to do is really, really sort of dive down into some of the results, because I think there's some interesting things that chocolate makers can learn by looking at the results in terms of how to label your products. So, for example, here's the question. So you might want to do is that if you're a craft chocolate maker and you are in the United States, the way everything is constructed right now, that you could write on the back of your product or on the front, if that's where you wanted to put it, product of USA, even if you were importing the beans from another country, right? That is a given. That's the way the rules work right now. And unfortunately, this PDF, there are actually no live links, so I need to scroll down in order to be able to find the part of the document that I'm looking for. And I apologize for doing all this scrolling in front of you right now and looking away, because I suppose, maybe let me do this. So if you are a statistician, one of the things that I really, really appreciate about this report, even though I'm not a deep dive statistician, even though I'm not hugely conversant with some aspects of survey construction, to making sure that the results will end up being statistically significant and reliable is that all of the methodology and all of the math used is actually in the report. So unlike, for example, the reports around cadmium and lead and whether I should be worried about cadmium and lead in my diet, if you actually go look at the methodology, it's one paragraph, right? There's not a whole lot of information about how this is done, and they're not publishing much of their data set. So, I mean, this is interesting to me. I mean, I wasn't expecting it, but here are the USDA or the Department of Health and Human Services guidelines about what the poverty threshold is in the United States. I mean, this is interesting, right? Poverty is $13,590 for a household of one person. Why this might be interesting to you. I mean, and it's an example of why just random reading of documents can be so illuminating, is that every single one of us who is in this industry lives in a community. And if our primary market or our first market of selling is in our local community, then what we need to do is we need to tailor the pricing of our products to the local community. So for an example of this, before I moved to Brooklyn, I lived in a very wealthy suburb of Westchester County called Larchmont, right? And anybody who's done any research into household income and the wealthiest suburbs in the country will know that Larchmont is up there. I'm not saying this to brag, it's a matter of circumstances. I married into it. But what's interesting is that right next door, there are two communities, the community of Mamaroneck and the community of New Rochelle. And in Larchmont and in Mamaroneck, there just happened to be two chocolate shops. And the two chocolate shops were very, very different. The one in Larchmont, which was catering to a much wealthier community, where the household income, average household income was well over $100,000. The products were created, the chocolate they were made with, the way they were marketed, represented what was going on. You know, that income aspect of the community. Whereas right next door in Mamaroneck, average household income was under $70,000, and I believe it was actually significantly lower than that. And so the chocolate shop that was there used a very different chocolate. It was one that, while good, doesn't have the sort of cachet that an imported European chocolate might have. And the product mix and ingredients and recipes reflected the local household income. And so understanding what HHI is, so household income is, where you are, understanding can give you a clue as to what you need, what you can charge in your local community for what it is that you're making. Right. And I was, again, this is a tangent, but I wasn't expecting to find this data in the middle of this table, in the middle of this document. So I'm scrolling down, going through this, and the results. So they're talking about they're talking about the survey and how the survey was constructed, but they're actually publishing the data that they collected during the survey. So what was the age distribution? What was the education distribution? Gender? Household income, cool, household size. So metropolitan status, right? This is also helpful to understand race and ethnicity. So what I've got here is that even though I don't have the actual underlying individual data set, what I can do here is I can understand to some extent who the audience was that responded to this. So mostly white, non-Hispanic, mostly people who lived, in this case, in the South, primarily in English. For me, if I was doing something, this says, I'd want to know the distribution of how did survey respondents answer this based on whether they lived in a rural area as opposed to a big city. That would be an interesting bit of information that I could get out of this. And I can start to see some of those patterns coming through here. So they do a comparison with general census data, right? So there's a lot here that you can look at and understand. Here's what a good survey, here's what a good bit of research, the results should include. And if we hit here, we're on page 40 of the report. This is where we start taking a look at some specific things that were asked in the survey. So there are four different parameters in one dimension that they wanted to look at. Number one is we didn't mention product of USA on the label anywhere. And then we had three different representations. We had product of USA wrapped around an American flag. We had product USA in this presentation and product USA just as a plain text representation, right? And so the next thing they talk about is people's responses to these in general. So, which one of these did they prefer, right? Which is interesting. But even more interesting to me is we come down here. What I want to do is I want to take a look at this and say, okay, so for beef, and obviously this was the survey was specifically about beef, what we find is that there is a one-to-one correlation between any of these product of USA claims, not one-to-one, a very, very high correlation between any of these product of USA claims and the notion of 100% grass-fed. So people who are aware of the product of USA claim, right, were also extremely interested in grass-fed, right? But they were not interested in the connection between made in USA and sustainably raised. And they were not interested in eco-friendly, and they were not interested in organic, right? Really, really interesting. I am having trouble. So this one down here, I believe, has to do with like free range, right? Or so not raised in a farm or barn. And what we'll do is that we'll find that it was when there was no made in USA, this was, people didn't understand it, why it was there. But when it was made in conjunction with some of these other things, some of these other presentations of the product of USA, people were open to it. This certified humane, I mean, this is interesting. Certified humane was what they call a false alarm. There was no correlation between the use of product USA flag and this product of USA here. But for this one, I mean, there was absolutely no interest in it when there was no correlation, obviously, when there was no product of USA claim there. But this product of USA, right, and certified humane had some resonance with the people who took the test, took the survey. And so we have more, right, in terms of, analyzing the results, so to your knowledge, what does product labeling claim mean, right? And lots of questions and the way they were answered. It's just really, really valuable in terms of understanding how these survey instruments get changed and how the public comments around these surveys can go and influence domestic policy and something like country of origin labeling. So if we want to call it a product of USA, right, what are the things that consumers already think about what product of USA means, and how are we going to, from a labeling perspective, be able to clearly communicate what product of USA means? That's what this is all about. So why that becomes interesting, I think, to some extent, is that we have the FASIS, which is the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service, so part of Customs and Border Patrol. They also did a cost-benefit analysis. So what is going to be the impact, right, on consumers, number one, and manufacturers, number two, on the use of the product of USA labeling, right? So you can go through this document and you can look through the analysis. You can figure out for yourself if you believe or disbelieve the idea that product of USA labeling claims make sense. Now, again, this is in beef, and it may not be directly applicable to chocolate, but I think that understanding what it is that's being done here, why it's being done, how it's being done, and what the concerns are, right? So, for an hour's worth of reading, what you can do is you can come away with this and say, how would I, as a craft chocolate maker, use country of origin labeling, right, to better explain my product to my customers? And is there a competitive advantage to doing so? And if there is a competitive advantage, does it from a cost-benefit analysis perspective make sense to do it? Right? So this is what intrigued me. This is why I thought this discussion of country of origin labeling, when it came to labeling chocolate, was cool. right? Just as a topic. And before I jump into moving into this next title, just want to say hello to Mark and Yuri in Denver, Colorado. And, Mark, I sent you an email just before I got online here and thinking about the schedule for coming and visiting you up in Kittredge while I'm on my way on my cross-country craft chocolate odyssey. So looking forward to continuing that conversation. So, again, anything having to do with the USDA, FDA, anything which has to do with food, right, related to chocolate manufacturing, any kind of food manufacturing, you're going to find something in the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, which is going to set forth the regulations which cover that aspect of the business. And so I am here in the electronic, the eCFR, which you can get to. Now, you don't have to worry about the URL here or you don't have to worry about reading closely here, because all the links to all the pages that I'm showing you today are here. So this link, for one reason or another, I'm not entirely sure why, when I tried to do a bookmark card for this page, it doesn't want to work. It works properly for chocolate, CFR 21.163, but it doesn't work for CFR 19. I have no idea why. But this country of origin marking, what you'll do is you'll originally find out, if you go and read it closely, the country of origin marking is in part, we're in Title 19, so it has to do with customs and border. So Title 19, if we hover over it, right? Title 19 customs duties. So Part 134 is about country of origin marking. So one of the things this is about making sure that if there is a container, and a container could actually be a shipping container, or it could be a box on a pallet in a container. So the container has a fungible definition. Fungible is it not? Actually, it could be changed. It is a descriptor of just a generic container. It doesn't mean a shipping container, right? So what it says is that a product coming into the United States, there must be on the container an indication of the country from which that product came. And if there is no indication on the outside of the box or an outside of the pallet or outside of the container, then the people at border control who are doing the inspections can hold things up a little bit. So one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that your containers, your shipping boxes, are properly labeled so that they have the country of origin. So that's just general. Why is this the case? You'll find out why is this the case. It's because the United States has preferential tariff relationships with some countries. So a product coming from somewhere in the Caribbean, let's say the Dominican Republic, may have favored tariff status coming into the United States compared with a product from Cuba, right? Which would, in most cases until very recently, be confiscated at the border, right? So there is a special tariff agreement, we used to be called NAFTA, between the US, Mexico, and Canada. And so you want to make sure that your boxes were labeled properly so that you would be able to make sure that the customs duties that were applicable to your product were calculated properly, right? Just so you know that there's also connections to this. I was speaking with some people yesterday about the Food Safety Modernization Act and the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. And so these are also topics which are of interest related to NAFTA, USMCA, so the United States, Mexico, Canada, which is the successor to NAFTA. And so there's all these definitions in here, which, by the way, if you are doing any importing or exporting, right, even if you have a customs broker, even if you just having a glancing familiarity with these, if you are importing cocoa beans yourself, if you're buying from a trader broker, if you're bringing over any specialty ingredient, just understanding what these things mean are just really important. So spend an hour, download this, put it on your phone, put it on your tablet when you're, someplace where you're traveling. Go and read this so that you can get an idea of what all the rules are. So part of this is they're going to be used to calculate duties. So for example, chocolate equipment or equipment for converting cocoa beans into chocolate, right, are free from customs. And so there's an HSC, a harmonized standard code, which if it is indicated properly on the box with the country of origin, will mean that your product can be entered into the United States free of customs duties. Really, really important to understand. right? And what this section here is, it gives Customs and Border Patrol the ability to hold the product in the port of entry, right, until it is properly marked, and they're going to charge you. Number one, for storage. So for every day, there's going to be a cost for keeping that on the port, and then there's going to be a cost for the service of marking it properly, right? Depending upon how egregious it is, there may be penalties. And here's where we're talking about articles subject to marking. Now, we'll get back to why that's important, right? But there are two things that I just wanted to highlight here because I thought they were interesting in the context of chocolate. So this one, 134.13. So what this seems to suggest is that an imported article, which is going to be repacked or otherwise manipulated, needs to be, right, definitely needs to have a country of origin labeling on it, both before and afterwards. So that's important to know. That's what it appears to be under this section. Because it's general and it doesn't exempt food from this, then, all right, you might think that this might apply to chocolate. Articles usually combined. So if I have, again, I have an ingredient and I don't sell it, but it's usually combined with other things, then it appears to be that there needs to be a country of origin labeling before and afterwards. This is what this says. Excuse me. And this will tell you, excuse me, again, how things need to be marked. I wanted to scroll down here, right? And there's a bunch of deep in the weeds legal stuff. But here is a whole list of exceptions. So anything which is on this list is exempted from the requirements of country of origin marking or labeling, right? And I'm going to do a real quick look. And I'm going to type the word cocoa, and cocoa is not exempted. I'm going to take cacao. Cacao is not exempted. Chocolate. Okay. And chocolate is not exempted. So what that means is that any cocoa, cacao, or chocolate product which is brought in from a foreign country, right, there needs to be country of origin labeling on the boxes. And a container could mean an individual package. So if I had a box of 10 2-kilo bags, the country of origin labeling would have to be on the outside box, and it needs to be on individual bags, right? For cocoa, cacao, and chocolate, because they are not exempted right here. And you can go and look and see what is exempted. For some reason, eggs are exempted, right? Don't know why that they are exempted and cocoa and chocolate are not. I'm kind of curious as to whether sugar, I didn't take a look. Maple sugar is exempted, but not cane sugar. So if I'm importing a cane sugar or beet sugar from someplace outside the United States, it needs to be identified. So that makes sense. All right. So the basic, so the headline, right, is linked to, and then there are links to subheadings in here that you can go and pay attention to. Again, read it through. I find every time I run into something like this, it's really, really interesting for me because it helps me, not it helps me, it often gives me a clue, right, for ways to use the regulations, right, in ways that might be able to help craft chocolate makers differentiate their products from other chocolates, from other chocolate makers, industrial chocolate makers specifically. And just, in that light, I want to say we're about halfway through today's Chocolate Life Live. Today we're talking about how cool is cool, country of origin labeling, and what it might mean for craft chocolate makers, or how do the regulations or the proposed regulations which the USDA is making. So here's the proposed USA. The answer is this product of USA claims right now is focused on the meat industry. So no direct reason to believe that it will be applicable to chocolate. But what can we learn from what the USDA is telling us? One of the things we can learn is we can go to this this document where they're analyzing consumer sentiment of product of USA labeling claims. And we might be able to say, even though these have to do with the meat industry, are there lessons that I can learn from the research? Right? Are there trends? Are there ideas? Is there language that I might be able to use to talk about my chocolate? Right? So even though this is 50 some odd pages long and you have to go to page 40 before you start getting into the analysis of the results, right? I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in here for a chocolate maker, right, to go take a look at as they're figuring out what needs to be on their labels, or not just what needs to be on their labels, but what they want to be on their labels and what they want to emphasize on their labels. Right? So again, if you're watching today, give a shout out in the comments. Let me know where you're connecting from. I'll get that shout out up on the screen. And thank you for watching from wherever you are today. I know that we have an international audience. It's always good to know where you're connecting from. Of course, if you have a question about anything that I talk about today, you can go and ask that question in the comments. And again, for every single one of these live streams, I will put together, I will put together a post on the Chocolate Life. So you don't need to worry about grabbing the URLs of pages. You don't need to worry essentially about really reading closely, trying to get what it is that I'm saying from the text on the screen. It can be small. I'm scrolling past very, very quickly. You can go to this post on the Chocolate Life and you can find the links to every single one of the documents that I've linked to in the course of the hour. And so having reset and welcome everybody to the second half of this episode of the Chocolate Life Live. What I want to do is talk about how to think about country of origin labeling in the context of craft chocolate, right? And there are two components, one of which is where the product is made, and the other one is where ingredients come from, right? So, I mean, if the product is made outside the United States and imported, chances are you'll look at the back and it will say made in Mexico, made in France. I mean, it may say hecho en Mexico, produit en France. It may not be in English, but there will be an indication of where that product is made, usually on the back of every package, right? And that's to indicate that it is in fact imported. And this is a matter of a lot of confusion for some people. It's important to know this is a matter of fact, this is a huge confusion, right, for some people. So for example, there was a recent lawsuit against Godiva. Consumers thought that Godiva products were essentially Belgian, right? And there was a reference to Belgium and 1926, I think, if not 1926, in much of the marketing and packaging. And so people assumed that the product they were buying was in fact manufactured in Belgium, when as a matter of fact, it was made in Pennsylvania, right? And some people were suing Godiva because thought that was deceptive marketing practices, even though on the back of the box, it probably said made in USA. It's just, okay. So I'm not a fan of these kinds of lawsuits because they just seem to me for a way for lawyers to get richer over very, very small things. And I don't know that it will actually fix the behavior. I have a phrase that I use. I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you, right? So, I don't understand what these people were thinking of when they went into Target, right? We're buying Godiva product. They're going into Target so they can buy it at a discount. And yet, for some reason, they were confused about it being a premium product. I don't understand how that all works, right? So we do have that. And another aspect of it is, in fact, the Belgian brand Callebaut. So Callebaut has a manufacturing plant in St. Albans, Vermont. And they have a manufacturing plant in St. Hyacinthe, which is in Canada. And it is possible to buy, quote unquote, Belgium's finest chocolate or Belgian chocolate, something which has the Callebaut brand on it, right? Which is a Swiss company. Let's forget about, which is composed of a Belgian and a French company, right? But is a Callebaut branded product, which is quote unquote Belgian, which is manufactured in St. Albans, Vermont, right? Is it in fact Belgian, right? And so this is why country of origin labeling is helpful to an astute customer. They can look at the back and go, oh, this product from Callebaut was actually manufactured in Belgium, or this product from Callebaut was actually manufactured in Vermont or Canada or someplace else in the world, right? And so country of origin labeling in that respect is very, very useful to overcome consumer confusion. You can say, listen, the consumer might have been confused, but if they looked closely at the label, it said made in USA, right? And so that absolves us, right, of responsibility for their inability to comprehend, right, what's going on. The other aspect of it, when it comes to craft chocolate, is that one of the things that craft chocolate makers can do, that industrial chocolate makers struggle with, right, is to be able to talk about where the cocoa beans come from, right? So, right, let's show some examples. So this is from a new chocolate maker called Terroir Chocolate. And my understanding is that you can read this properly. It's out of focus, so I'll put it back here. This is a company called Terroir Chocolate from Onyx Coffee, right? And if you look at the front of this, I mean, it says that it's a 62% dark chocolate, and the beans come from Colombia, right? Now, right, for me, I mean, the fact that it says Colombia, it's actually very, very difficult to read, right? But what's interesting about the way the package is constructed is this card comes out, right? Right. And the first thing you see that not only is it Colombia, right, but it tells you that the beans come from Tumaco in Colombia. Now, here is a map of Colombia. They don't actually show where Tumaco is, right, which I think is a mistake, right, because there are a number of cocoa growing regions in Colombia that they could be purchasing from. But what this does is immediately establishes the fact that I understand where the cocoa beans used to make this bar come from. Now, on the back, there's a text explanation. So they say where Tumaco is. They say it's in the southern Pacific coast, right? And they also list pricing, farm gate price, purchase price, commodity price, right? And that's interesting. They say the farm gate price of these beans is US $2.55 a kilo, when the market price when they purchased was $2.34 a kilo. The delivered price, which is the price that they paid landed at their factory, was $8.50 a kilo, which means that, wow, transportation logistics was really expensive to get this cocoa from Colombia to where they are, which, I mean, if they're buying lots of Colombian coffee, I'm not exactly certain why that's the case. But you have this box, right? Right? The box says Colombia on the front, right? It doesn't say made in USA or anything like that on the back, right? Which for export could be a problem. They may have no interest in exporting. But again, for me, Colombia being tiny, right, makes it a little difficult to read. But when you open it up, the first thing you see is where. And so Colombia is very, very definitely the country of origin for these cocoa beans. And not only that, but Tumaco in Colombia, which is something that a big chocolate maker, Barry Callebaut, want to say most of the products from Valrhona, most of the product from Belcolada, big companies, they can't do that, right? And so this is what's interesting. So we have the same sort of thing. Here's another package from Terroir Coffee. It says Madagascar on the front. Again, for me, a little difficult to read, but you'll notice, you know, there's some color differences here. So I can say, oh, I want the pink one, I want the orange one. Really, really nice to do. And you open it up and it says Madagascar, and then it says Bajofo Estate. And then you turn it over and it says Bertil Akkeson. Now, Bertil Akkeson is not going to mean much to people who are not really in the chocolate industry, but there is a very, very specific country of origin indication on this bar. Again, some flavor notes, the price that they paid, farm gate price of $5.79 when the commodity price was $2.34. I mean, interesting decisions in terms of what it is that they're decided to do. And a third example, right, is Uganda. And, you know, who knows about origin from Uganda? So we have the Semuliki forest, right? So it's number one. I'm really like this idea. So there's a Japanese company called Minimal Bean to Bar, and they use a foil zipper pouch, the plastic zipper strip pouch across the top, and they have a similar kind of concept where it's all the same except for a card which slides in to hold to cutouts on the label, and so they can individualize each product based on what's on the card, which is a way to reduce the number of different SKUs when it comes. You have to have the number of different parts you have to have when you're putting together packaging. It talks about where we are in the world. I mean, this is just it's one of the nicer implementations of what is it that a craft chocolate maker can do to identify their product. I personally would want to see in this presentation, I'd want to see the country of origin for the beans to be more obvious. So bolder, larger type, something like that, just jump off the page so that I can instantly know, ooh, Uganda, right? Right. It's one die. There's some debossing on here, front and back. It's very, very nice. The differences are in the paper that they're using. Just really, really clean, really, really well thought out. I mean, little nitpicking, but I think it's a really great way to think about country of origin labeling, right? In terms of what is the origin for my cocoa beans. I was doing alt ingredients last week and was talking about this company, Supplant, which makes a one-to-one sugar replacement. And they are, what's interesting about this is that in addition to everything else, they put the origin of the cocoa beans right here. It's in very, very tiny print down at the bottom, where it says that the origin of the cocoa beans is Venezuela. Now, I understand from the marketing perspective, because this is all about this company, the Supplant company. Right? What they want to do is they want to promote their sugar replacement product. So it's most important to them to identify this with Supplant. Right? They're in partnership with Thomas Keller. They want to talk about that. But for a chocolate fan, right, somebody who wants to know about things, putting Venezuela up there and making it much more prominent is going to be much more interesting, I think, to a chocolate fan. So it's there. In my opinion, they're not really taking advantage of that. But also in the back, they have not made in USA, but they have made in Napa. I have to know that Napa is Napa, California, but it says there is a country of origin labeling for country of manufacture and then where the cocoa beans come from. Again, really, really important idea. I think it could have been done more obviously, but I think it's in the right direction. For people who have been around watching for some time, we did a live stream a couple of weeks ago announcing the winners of the Craft Chocolate Challenge. And Dustin Cornett, who runs the Chocolat Inn, was the organizer of the challenge, and he has his own chocolate brand. He did not enter the competition, so his bars were not eligible for awards. But on his packaging, he has got, Philippines front and center. Right? Again, what I would like to do is I would like that to be a little more obvious. I have to hunt for it, right? Which is a challenge. I mean, one of the things I will say about the Supplant bars is that the location of the origin is in the same place every single time. And so I think that's also important, right? So I would like to see the Philippines be more obvious here. But otherwise, I think it's important that what they've done is they've indicated what the country of origin is. And I believe on the inside, what they do is it's a good use of the box. I mean, there's a lot of printed information on the inside of the box. And if you come onto the inside, they talk very, very specifically in this panel here that we're not just the Philippines, but they're talking about a farm, the Cablon farm in South Cotabato in Davao region of the Philippines. And it's indicated where the Philippines is on the map here. This is what chocolate makers can do, right? Or craft chocolate makers can do, that big industrial chocolate makers have a real trouble doing, right? And so I want to really highlight my thought process when I was talking about product of USA, country of origin labeling, what that would mean for craft chocolate makers and what it could do. So, so here we are. We have 2 bars. Again, another one from, and we have percentage, and we have the fact that this is from Haiti, right? Right up front, we know that the beans are from Haiti, and very nice. And Haiti is mentioned twice, but there's a correspondence of location, which is very, very nice. Really, really good. We can go to Ashkenazi chocolate, and similar kind of thing. What Sean has done, right, is boom, right? The location is right there, front and center on the bar, right? The vow in the Philippines. Right? So we know what's going on. And in the back, just what you want to know, right? Right? Big USA. So people know that it is a product of the USA. So it was assembled, manufactured, completed in the United States, but ingredient came from the Philippines. Right? If we look at it consistently, right? Whatever we might think about the color, I can say the colors are different, and I can go, oh, I want the orangish one as opposed to the more magenta-ish one. But I know that this is from Mababu in Tanzania. Right? The origin of the beans, and on the back, in exactly the same place, it says made in USA. I mean, a really, really good and very, very thoughtful approach to how to think about country of origin labeling, right? To let your customers know where it was made. It might have been made in Denver, it might have been made in Kansas City, but also to let them know where the beans come from at the same time. And so Mike, who's at Encore Coffee in Kansas City, will know that in the specialty coffee world, one of the things that most people are interested in is they want to know where the coffee beans come from. And, they know the difference between an Ethiopian Mocha Dahima. They know the difference between an Ethiopian Mocha Harar. They will know the difference between, so what's the difference between beans from Panama and a Panamanian geisha? I mean, the specialty coffee aficionado is very, very up to this kind of terminology. And it's front and center on the bags of coffee that we buy. And it's front and center to the way the coffee shop talks about their coffee, and to the way that the barista is able, as an educator, is able to talk about the specific coffee with a customer in a specialty coffee shop, right? And it's different. If I go into a grocery store and I see apart from 1 or 2 brands, which are associated with a particular region, a brand associated with Colombia, for example, Juan Valdez. I will know that Colombia is a part of the marketing identity for what's going on. But in many respects, in many brands, it's just cheap blend. I don't know where the coffee comes from. It could come from Vietnam. It could come from who knows where it comes from. It's going to be a Robusta, and where the coffee comes from is not a part of the discussion. But when we get into the specialty coffee discussion, the prices can go astronomically. I was in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and somebody was charging $14 for a single V60 pour over of a very, very rare coffee. And it seemed extreme to me, right, that somebody could get $14 for a cup of coffee, and that same person would have trouble spending the same amount for a bar of chocolate with the same characteristics, right? So one of the reasons to go and be very, very careful about thinking about special origins is that it adds a cachet, right? And it could be a way to be able to justify higher prices for what it is that you're doing. Now, it's interesting that Ashkenazi has another presentation entirely. So if you ever see an Ashkenazi presentation where the bag is relatively unlabeled, right? All of the information is on this tag. And so these are their special editions and limited edition bars. And again, they're very, very consistent about what it is they do. Not quite so. So there's no big USA on the back, as there is, on this bar, right? There's a big USA on the back. And on this one, but it does say Springfield, Missouri. We do have that indication of that. One thing I'm really proud of, right? I just want to let everyone know is if you ever take a look at an Ashkenazi bar and you see something that says chocolate date on there, that chocolate, spelled CHO-CHOCOLATE, CHOC-O-LOT. That was something that I suggested to Sean way back in 2006 or 2007. And so it just tickles me that it's still in use on the bars. But what you'll notice is that every single one of these bars, when you get right down to it, they have a country of origin of the cocoa beans where it is appropriate. And on the back, they talk about not only the origin of the cocoa beans, but the origins of the cocoa butter. Right? So really, really, really cool. So this is going to be from the province of Zamora. So it's the Mayo Zamora Chinchipe, which, if you know anything about the origins of cocoa, is where there is the first recorded archaeological record for the domestication and use of cacao in the world. So about 5,500 years before present is when that goes back to. So there's a real interesting connection. But again, if you look at this, there's all the bars from Askinosie, there's a very deliberate, very thoughtful use of how to incorporate country of origin labeling to establish the bona fides of the company and to establish, in this case, uniqueness, right? So this is the Zeke bar. It's the third edition of the Zeke bar. We know what the percentage is. We know where the cocoa comes from, right? It is just, really, really a textbook example of the right way to go about doing it. So just, I would recommend people pay attention to that. Another example that I want to talk about before we get to the end of the day is Luis Abram in Brazil. So anybody who knows anything about Brazilian chocolate will know that a craft chocolate maker in Brazil is pretty much limited to using Brazilian cacao, right? But even so, we have very, very specific understanding of this is wild chocolate from the Brazilian Amazon. So chocolate de cacao selvagem, de cacao selvagem da Amazônia brasileira, right? With a translation. And so the Rio Juruá, which is where it comes from. And we come to the back, and then we place where the Juruá is on the back, right? So immediately we know where the cacao comes from, right? Even if we couldn't tell from what it is we know about Luis Abram as a company. And we come to the back and we understand where the cocoa comes from. And then there is a very, very specific country of origin labeling. And one little thing to look for in your labeling or anybody else's labeling. So there is a specific fabricado por, right? It's important to word Portuguese, so that por doesn't mean for, right? It means manufactured by. Right? So it says it's manufactured by, right? The legal name of the company. So Familia Abram Banks Limitada. So where they are, they're in São Paulo, the state of São Paulo and the city of São Paulo, but made in Brazil, right? So there is an indication on the front. Immediately, we know where the beans come from. And on the back, we know where the chocolate is made. A really, really good example of how to use the wrapper to be able to communicate some unique characteristic of what you're doing. I have, another one. We were doing this alt milk chocolate earlier in the week and looking at Udalali. And, right up front, premium cacao from the Philippines. Right? Now, there is no more indication about where in the Philippines the cacao comes from. It's not a part of what it is they want to do with this particular bar, because they're really talking about the alternative milk that they're using here. But again, on the back, in the ingredients, it's not just cacao, it's Philippine cacao. So they're reinforcing the origin, the country of origin on it. There's a little map around the Philippines, right, which is good. And there is actually also, boom, manufactured by Udalali, right? Manufactured by Udalali. It says Cerrito, California. Somebody who is not El Cerrito, California. Somebody who is not very sophisticated might say CA and think it was Canada. There's no USA there. So they might want to be more specific and actually put the USA at the end of it. But you look at this and you immediately know, right, that Philippine cacao is an important part of what it is that this bar is about. And that is what it is that I would suggest, right, that everyone who is involved in making craft chocolate take away from this discussion of country of origin labeling. We normally think, or we would normally associate country of origin labeling with products that are manufactured completely in other countries, right? And what we're doing is we're saying on the label, so people are not confused, where that product comes from. Now, it turns out that there is nuance, as I said, right? For a Switch watch, to be able to say Swiss made on the face, only 50% of the materials and or labor need to be manufactured or done in Switzerland in order to be able to qualify for the Swiss made label, right? And if you didn't know that, you might wonder about the Swiss electronics manufacturing industry when it comes to quartz movements, right? How can Swatch be called Swiss made, for example, right? But it turns out that that aspect of this also goes up into watches which might cost $10,000 or $20,000, right? So a very, very expensive prestige brand Swiss watch, says made Swiss made on the face, could have a quartz movement made in Japan, right? Which would not need to be disclosed. Just a quick note, right? When it comes to beef, right, and meat products, if the animal was grown in a foreign country and then slaughtered, and then a whole animal was shipped here to the United States, and it was cut down here in the United States and packaged for retail sale, I could label it as product of USA, which, without having to, on the package to the consumer, right, indicate that, without having to indicate that, for example, talking about lamb, that the lamb came from New Zealand, for example. Although if somebody is buying lamb from New Zealand, they want to charge a premium price for it, perhaps. But the whole idea of product of USA would be able to say, here's a sheep, it was grown in Colorado, it was slaughtered in Colorado, it was packaged and sold, and everything was done in the United States. And so in that makes sense, right? That's where the guidelines around product of USA come from. It's designed to be able to give consumers confidence that they understand, right, where the product comes from and how it was manufactured, as opposed to just something that's involved in customs, which is markings on boxes and markings on containers that said, this is where this come from, so that we know how to handle the product at the port with respect to assessing customs duties, certain forms of inspection, other kinds of legalistic aspects of importation into the United States. Right? Now, none of that has anything to do with chocolate, right? It's legalistic. They're talking about an entirely different foodstuff, right? But what it did is it sparked in my mind this thought process about the parallels. What can I learn by reading, right, the announcement and the research backing the announcement? What can I learn from reading those things which might be applicable to chocolate? Right? And that's what I wanted to get across today, right? That chocolate, for many people, chocolate exists in a bubble, and there's no relationship. The only reason why there's a relationship to the FDA regulations on milk is that I make milk chocolate and I need to include milk, right? But there are nuances. If you actually go read the guidelines about plant-based milk alternatives, which the USDA is proposing, or the FDA is proposing, excuse me, there's language in there that will help you understand how to communicate about plant-based milk alternative chocolate, right? Around nutritional benefit, you get some information about how you might want to talk about the ethics associated with sourcing, about climate change, other aspects of sustainability related to the product's, total carbon footprint, things like that. There are lots of little details, right, that tax dollars pay for, that you can go in there and just pull out little gems, right, and make a part of your branding, right, and make a part of the way you communicate about your product to your customers, right? And that's where, for me, the thought process started. New product of USA. What does this have to do with country of origin labeling? Is there anything I can learn about the intersection of those two things that might have an impact on chocolate, especially craft chocolate makers here in the United States? And if you're not in the United States and you're thinking about exporting your product to the United States, how you want to think about, oh, right, I need to say made in France, made in Belgium, made in the UK, made in New Zealand. That needs to be, right, somewhere on the packaging, should be somewhere on the packaging, right? Right. But that what you want to do is you want to focus on where the beans come from and make it an integral part and an upfront and forward part, right, of the front label real estate, right, to be able to differentiate what it is that you're doing from what it is that industrial chocolate makers, Big Chocolate, is doing. Right? And with that, we're at the end of the hour. We're just gone a couple of seconds over. And I want to say thanks, everybody, for joining me here today. I want to do a quick little preview. So a week from today, Friday the 17th of March, I'm going to be doing a live stream and interviewing Terry Collingsworth and Mickey Mistrati. So Terry is at International Rights Advocates, and he's been leading the legal fight in the United States to hold Big Chocolate accountable for illegal child labor and slavery, knowingly profiting from it. And he's going to be giving us an update on where the current lawsuits are. And also Mickey Mistrati is going to be joining us. Mickey is the filmmaker behind The Chocolate War. He was also the filmmaker behind The Dark Side of Chocolate. For people who want to know, The Chocolate War is now available on Amazon Prime and on Apple TV. So if you're a subscriber to either Amazon Prime or Apple TV, you can go and you can watch The Chocolate War on either of those streaming platforms. And I think it's worldwide, right? There may be some country restrictions, I'm not sure. I know that it's available in the UK and in the United States. But we're going to be talking about the film, the distribution, awards. We're going to be talking about the fallout of it, how it is affected, if it has affected at all, public sentiment towards the lawsuits and things like that. So I did a save the date on Instagram. So please save the date for this coming Friday, the 17th of March at 12 o'clock Eastern. Actually, it's Eastern Daylight Time. Need to be very careful about that. I put Eastern Standard Time. It's Eastern Daylight Time. But it's next Friday. To do that. It's going to be a lot of fun. They're both lovely people. I've had them on the Chocolate Life Live before, and I'm looking forward to catching up with them on where things are and to catching up on where things are with you. And with that, I want to say again, thanks everybody for joining me here today, for staying through to the end, especially for throwing comments into the live stream, knowing that you're watching, knowing where you're watching from. And with that, I want to remind everybody, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you are doing it wrong. Until the next time.